Hi everyone, welcome to our public meeting on issues and updates related to Secord Lake. My name is Kayla Stryker and I'm the Secretary for Four Lakes Task Force. This is our third meeting in a series of meetings that we're holding with updates specific to each lake's issues and concerns. If you're interested in the Sanford or Wixom Lake meeting information, you can find those recordings on our website. If you'd like to attend the Smallwood Lake meeting, that's coming up on August 24th, and you can find information to call into that on our website under the Meetings tab. So we're hosting this meeting virtually due to COVID restrictions, but we did receive a lot of questions and comments via email prior to the meeting, and we believe we've structured this presentation to respond to a lot of those questions. If you still have questions that you haven't submitted, you can do so during the meeting in the questions tab and go to webinar. And in the final 30 minutes of this presentation, we will respond to all of the public questions and comments that we can. And I'll turn it over to Phil Dass.
Well, thank you for being with us today. It's a beautiful hot day. Thank you for taking time to be with us. We'll try not to be too lengthy. I'm Phil Dass. I am the representative for Secord Lake and the Four Lakes Task Force. And today we have some presenters with us. It will be Dave Kepler. He's the president of the Four Lakes Task Force. We have Ron Hansen, he's PE, Spicer Engineering. And we have Terry Cram. He is our erosion leader. And so they will be presenters. Also with us today I have Joel Vernier. He's the Gladwin County Commissioners here. Don Zackett, Four Lakes Task Force. Dave Rothman, Four Lakes Task Force, and of course Kayla already introduced herself. She's our secretary, and also we have Stacy Trapani with us. She's our communications director. I just want to mention before we start quickly that if I've heard one thing in visiting our lake community, and several of you people out there, is we've been kind of bad at getting communications out to you, and we understand that, we get that, and this is what we're trying to do now. We're trying to correct that. We want to get more communications out. That's why we're separated the lakes here. We had a meeting concerning Sanford. We had a meeting concerning Wixom. Today is Secord. Next, in a few weeks, will be Smallwood. So we're trying to reach out and become more, so we can be more transparent, and so you can try to clarify our way forward. At the end of this presentation, we're going to have the question and answers as Kayla mentioned, and so you can submit those. This Saturday, we have a Secord Lake Association meeting. We're hosting our annual meeting, and it will concern election. It's going to be more questions and answers, so we can try to address your concerns and your questions. So that'll be this Saturday at 10 o'clock. Our information's on our website, secordlakeassociation.org. Or if you're a member, you'll probably get a direct email. So if you don't get your question answered today, you have another opportunity Saturday. And so I have no more to say. I'm going to now introduce Dave Kepler is going to come forward and talk to you.
Thanks, Phil. So what we wanted to do here today is kind of go through an agenda. So is that what's on the screen? So I'm gonna kind of go through just some frequently asked questions. We do have a question and answer period. Let's go back to that. We haven't covered the agenda yet. Oh, did Phil do it? Okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't looking at the agenda. So let me just work through. I would just tell you that there's probably more feedback on the in Sanford community of the Four Lake communities and others we've had, and we want to Phil's point, make sure we get clarity on what's going on and as it relates to our current effort, and make sure we're clear on a few points. These are points that have been in other previous broadcasts, and I know we're going to follow up with more questions later, but I wanted to get some pretty clear statements out there that people understood, and that we walk through those, and they do allow you, I think, to filter the other presentations in terms of what our intentions and views are, but then we're obviously open to questions and answers at the end, and we'll continue to communicate with that. So I'm looking at the top one now, so I'm not looking at this one. So the first question is, will Secord have to pay for Sanford and Wixom Lake? No. We've said that, well, this made sense. So let me start back over again and just review the kind of fundamental questions that we're hearing and we want to make sure we establish in that to work on. First of all, within the Four Lakes Task Force, we've been pretty clear that while we had a different plan before May 11th, before May 19th, because we looked at this as being pretty balanced in terms of operating costs and capital costs when we combined all the dams. And it was clear to how the legislation was kind of put together to cover this area. We were looking at cost sharing and then managing and reviewing the cost afterwards. Well, up front now it's obvious that the costs are different. So when the questions come up is who's going to pay for it? Is Sanford and Wixom going to be paid by funds from the Secord community? The answer to that is no. The second of all questions come up a lot is why can't we be separate? And can we be separate? And can we have our own special assessment district and be different from the other lake communities in Gladwin and Midland County? The answer to that is yes, technically. But we believe that it'd be ill-advised to do right now. The communities need to fund the studies and establish their roles in financing, and they'd have to reverse the 2 county resolutions and the 2 circuit courts and risk having the assessment districts be there at all or even have a legal level. So I'm not sure why anybody would want to go out and basically at a time when we have our lakes down to kind of go back to court and challenge the system that can bring them back up. And so we just fundamentally, that is something that clearly if the Secord community decided to do, they could go petition the 2 counties and create a court order difference. But our belief is that would be very detrimental to the ability for Secord to bring their lakes back up. The other question that's come up a little bit is around spillway capacity. Does Secord need additional spillway capacity? Yes, you do, and likely even under state jurisdiction. It's a long-standing fact that the spillways do not pass the spillway doesn't pass the probable maximum flood capacity requirements. And the state does not have a decision on spillway capacities because they've never regulated them. But the fact is, and so they don't really have a basis to make a decision, and they told us that, and so we would have to go in and review these studies and put that forward. And the reality is the dam did not contain all the water in the last flood that it was supposed to, so there is an issue about that as we go forward to work on. The next set of questions is, why is our estimate so different and larger than the Boyce estimate? And we actually haven't seen a Boyce technical estimate. We've seen numbers quoted by him, but his estimate looks at one item that we can tell. And in reality, if we look at the July 21st letter from FERC, they've identified 21 deficiencies. The GEI engineering consulting timetable was based, and Ron will be reviewing that, is based on repairs with a 75-year useful life. So this is the long-term cost of doing those repairs. If we're going to get long-term financing, we have to have a long-term plan. And the thing that we've looked at is the reality up front, and I'll show you in the timetable of how that drives. But clearly, we believe the number is significantly, just to do the engineering to study these 21 deficiencies, is significantly more than Boyce has been quoting. Can the Secord dam, if it's deemed safe, and it's deemed safe by the community, by the regulatory person, and by the owner. FERC's asked for operational plans to mitigate the lack of spillway capacity, so that might be an issue. And there may be other specific repair requirements and determinations that would have to be made to bring that up. So there is a possibility that you can manage this on an interim basis while making these long-term upgrades. And I wanted to just walk through the FERC position because it's hard for us to give an answer when fundamentally, really, we don't know, Boyce doesn't know, and FERC doesn't know exactly what's required to fix these dams. And that's what FERC's asked Boyce to provide with this independent engineering group, those answers so we can establish those. But hopefully you'll get some insight from our point of view. So it talks about the FERC What happened to the FERC letters?
It's 1 month.
Okay, sorry. We're working on that. Then we'll go back. So just to remember, prior to the FERC flood event, there was a design report that was due in February 2020. Boyce was unable to meet that, came to us, and we put together a preliminary design basis report for us. So we know that, the facts around that activity to go on. So we do know of the preliminary report, and we know about the scope of that effort. On May 20th, the letter, which came right after, asked for this lower the reservoir on Secord Lake along with Smallwood, perform a dam inspection within 3 days after the flows receded, and maintain fully lowered levels until the safe reservoir elevation could be established and implemented. And then he was also asked to form a fully independent investigation team within 7 days. So to be clear, there's a difference between the forensic investigation team and looking at the overall system and why it failed, and then these inspection reports to determine what has happened with the current dams and what's the requirement to bring them up. So in July 1st, we had another letter from FERC to Boyce that outlined the overall dam safety and public safety information, outlined the reports that had been submitted and the incident reports for that, and the damages and the expectation that these things were overdue, and the timing that they were overdue, which was about 17 days, I believe. And so that is a key issue. Is while we want these reports, they haven't come out yet, and we're deficient and behind in them. So now the next slide, that was it. So the bottom line is there's these two reports. We don't have the information from those reports, but we have a pretty clear viewpoint of those reports, that there's a concern about the spillway, there's a concern about the embankment, and by the way, those are the same concerns on Wixom Lake. So we believe that is going to be an issue about how these lakes have come up. Obviously, if we deem them to be safe after we review all the reports, community deems them to be safe, and FERC deems them to be safe, we can bring them back up if they come forward with that. Our belief is there's a challenge in you're going to have to show the feasibility to do the repairs and the funds to do the repairs, and we're concerned about all that coming together to work. So we have kind of shown this timeline before at our meetings, and I think what I wanted to highlight here was this first 3 to 6 months. You know, the reality is it's going to take, our belief is through the rest of this year to get these reports together. Boyce has indicated he doesn't have the funds to actually execute against those today, and so we're going to have to get those reports out from Boyce and then reviewed by FERC, and then determine what the engineering aspects are and move forward. And then what we're showing here are the long-term design constructions. So we're going to cover that next with Ron, but I just want to make a point that we've got about 3 or 4 months for the community to get together and figure out the financing plan on all 4 of these dams, figure out the feasibility engineering plan around all 4 of these dams, and figure out the financial plan around all 4 of these dams. And we have a plan to go forward and do that. We've outlined that in previous communications. We wanted to focus today on the Secord Dam and work through that. And so the mention here today to show you how we can go forward and have a long-term lake level for Secord and show some of the issues around it, and then recognize there's this issue going forward about how we can potentially bring or not bring up these dams. And we feel that there's just a significant mismatch between the expectation that we can bring them up in the next month or 2, and then having to go through and really look at these reports. And it's really hard to make a positive declaration either way, because Boyce doesn't know the answer, FERC hasn't seen the reports, and either have we. So that's what we're waiting for. Anyway, we covered all that now, right? Yeah, so what we want to do is kind of go through the resource estimate, and Ron will kind of cover where the kind of structure is to work with that. So I'll pass it over to Ron, and then we'll come back for Q&A and stuff to do. Apologize for the random slide doing here. We got a little offset here. Ron's going to be much better than I am at it. Good afternoon, everybody. Ron Hansen. So what I wanted to review today is the restoration summary and estimate. So after the May 19th event, the Four Lakes Task Force had hired GEI consultants to look at the dams in the post-failure condition and to prepare a planning level report that sort of summarizes and outlines what the next steps would be to restore the dams. And a full copy of that report is on the Four Lakes Task Force website. What we're going to do today is just review it in general. But a couple key points, if you go to the website and read it in detail, you should understand that the report is for planning level purposes. It does include some design concept assumptions, but we want to be clear that as things move forward, detailed engineering studies and detailed engineering must be completed to confirm the assumptions. So several key design criteria that have been included in the report. Number one, to provide a 75-year life service for each of the dams. So the dams have that's pushing 100 years old, and as we're moving forward in implementing improvements, we want to make sure that these improvements are designed to last for a long time. We also want to meet the current standard of practice for dam engineering. The technology and the methods for constructing dams are much more advanced now than they were when these dams were originally constructed in the 1920s. And finally, we want to pass what we call the half probable maximum flood, which is the state of Michigan design standard. We also have several assumptions when we're going through and looking at restoring the Secord Dam. Number one would be restoration of the existing spillway with new gates, reinforcement of the embankment, a new auxiliary spillway, improved flood control, and no hydropower. So as you're reviewing, as we're going through this presentation, the numbers that you're going to see assume that hydroelectric power generation would not be included. It is an option for the future, but it's just not outlined in here. So several key concepts. Passing the half probable maximum flood. As Dave mentioned, the Secord Dam, the Secord project has historically been regulated by FERC. FERC requires that the full PMF be passed. FERC has clearly stated that the Secord Dam does not have capability to pass the full PMF. If we move forward without hydropower, the state of Michigan and Eagle, their Part 315 dam safety requirements would require the Secord Dam to pass half the PMF. Currently, the Four Lakes Task Force is conducting a PMF study to understand exactly what the half PMF flow rate is and whether the Secord Dam to Michigan standards or doesn't. Our initial estimate, the half PMF to be in the 15,000 cubic feet per second range. The second concept for the Secord Dam restoration is decommissioning the powerhouse. And obviously we wouldn't need the powerhouse if hydropower is not going to continue to be generated. The third concept is embankment repairs and upgrades. This is pretty significant. Currently the embankment at the Secord Dam was constructed in a very similar fashion to how the Edenville Dam embankment was constructed. And as everybody's seen on the Edenville Dam from the videos,
the embankment did fail on Edenville Dam. So what we'd be looking at with the Secord Dam is to add a sheet pile cutoff wall through the existing embankment and widen the existing embankment. The next concept is there would be a primary spillway, and this would be rehabilitated. Of course, the primary spillway is where the concrete and where the gates are right now. And we would look to improve the spillway capacity. We would look to add new gates. We would look to rehabilitate the concrete. And then finally, a new auxiliary spillway. This would provide the additional spillway capacity to meet the half PMF requirement. So when we talk about the new spillways, the current spillways gates are what we call radial gates. So they have a hoist on them, and when you need to operate the gates to allow water to flow through, you lift the gates up. The concept here is to remove the radial gates, put new crest gates on. So what you're seeing in this picture is an example of a crest gate, and if you look in the picture in the lower right hand corner, you'll see that these gates drop down rather than lifting up, and so they are more fail-safe than a radial gate, which you can have problems lifting up. These ones drop down, so in an extreme situation you have the ability to drop the gate and allow water to flow through. The next slide is an engineering concept schematic for the Secord Dam, the primary spillway. So no, but right now the concrete, when you see the concrete spillway on the Secord Dam, it's hollow on the inside. And so the idea, the concept for rehabilitating the Secord Dam is to fill that hollow area with a cellular concrete fill. So this is highlighted in yellow on your picture. As you fill that hollow area in the dam with concrete, it adds weight. And so we would look to add what we call micro piles or dry piles below the dam to help support the extra weight of filling the gallery. And those micro piles are shown in blue on the schematic. And then finally, shown in blue on the very top is where the new gate would go. You'll notice is that before the new gate is put on, the sill elevation of the dam is lowered. This would allow for increased hydraulic capacity through the dam. One more thing to note in this picture too is you can see that we would have to raise the side walls and flatten the embankment on the downstream side. So that was the primary spillway. The primary spillway and the crest gates, they require operations. And so on a day-to-day basis, you would still have people that would operate the gates and lower the gates when flooding situations come to allow water to pass, and most of the water passes through the primary spillway. The auxiliary spillway is what we call a passive spillway. This would be used in during large flood events, and essentially when the gates, when the water starts to raise and the capacity of the gated spillway becomes utilized, then the auxiliary spillway would kick in. So this is the concept that was sent to FERC. It would be a auxiliary passive spillway. There would be a new concrete structure be on the east side of the dam. It would allow the water to drop over a new spillway, and then there would be a channel constructed that would direct the water down to the Tittabawassee River. So we covered the primary spillway, the auxiliary spillway, and now we have the embankment. So the picture that you see on the screen here is the design concept for the embankment repairs. One of the things that you should note on this picture, the blue line in the middle, this is what we would call our sheet pile cutoff wall. So the design concept is that sheet piling would be added through the entire embankment. What the sheet piling cutoff wall does is it improves the safety of the embankment, reduces the level of seepage, that water that could seep through the embankment. Also, the embankment concepts includes widening and flattening the slope on the embankment. So you can see here that we're suggesting a 20-foot minimum top width, and that we're suggesting filling and widening on the downstream side of the embankment. And those are the areas that are shown in yellow, green, and red. The red area would riprap that would be placed near the bottom. The yellow area would be fill, and the green area would be an internal drainage layer. So when we look at the preliminary level of cost opinions for the design concept for Secord Dam to pass the half PMF, probable maximum flood, we're looking at $24 million. So the $24 million is the planning level estimate to meet or exceed the state requirements. It's very early on, as we mentioned. Detailed engineering and studies must be completed, so this initial estimate has a confidence level of -30% to +50%, so that there's a range, and it could go up or it could go down. But what is included in the planning level opinion of cost right now is your site investigations, your dam, your construction management, your engineering, and a contingency. So let's talk about factors that could make the cost go up or down. Number one, increasing the spillway capacity to make the dam pass the full PMF will increase the cost. So if we're going toward, if regulations change, or if we look at an option to keep hydropower on the dam, then you would be required to pass the full PMF. That would increase the cost. As a result of basin-wide flood studies that are being done, these studies could identify things that may make the cost change. The idea of an inflow design flood may decrease the cost. The idea that more armoring on the embankment could increase the cost. So as we're looking at options and sustainability for the dam, right now we have the two concrete primary spillway, auxiliary spillway, and then the rest of embankment is grass and riprap. If additional armoring is needed on the rest of the embankment, that would increase the cost. Also, there's the findings of the independent forensic investigation team that when the forensic investigation is completed and that report is published, findings of that report could add or subtract from cost items, especially when we look at physical measures or operational measures. And then value engineering. There will be a value engineering exercise, which we hope will result in a reduction of cost. The whole purpose of the value engineering is to optimize the design and increase efficiencies, which would result in cost reductions. And then lastly, environmental restoration could increase project costs. So with that, that concludes our update on the design concept and planning level cost estimates. And from here, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Cram, and Terry is going to talk about erosion and erosion control efforts.
Well, thanks, Ron, and good afternoon, everybody.
Like Ron said, my name is Terry Cram and wanted to talk to you a little bit about erosion that's been going on our lakes and some of the things that we can do, some of the things that we have been doing to try to mitigate this problem. One of the things I wanted to mention to you up front was if you do have a pen and paper, you might bring that you might make that available to yourself, because I do have some phone numbers and some email addresses that would be helpful for you to write down during the presentation. So the Four Lakes Task Force volunteers have been out looking at some of the erosion issues and trying to work with the property owners to understand what the erosion concerns are, and then also to work with the property owners to try to mitigate these issues and give them ideas on how to prevent the erosion from getting worse. We've also had 2 erosion engineering fairs. One was in Midland County and the other one was in Gladwin County. Once we do go out to your property to look at the erosion damage, we will upload those pictures into our database and collect the information from you so that we can then have that data into the database. If you did attend one of those fairs, the Midland or the Gladwin County Fair, and spoke to one of the engineers, your property already is entered into the GIS system. So what we have been doing is having the volunteers come out and take a look at your property for the erosion issues. What we've since determined is that we might want to cut out the middleman, so to speak, in this case, and have the NRCS come directly out to your homes to inspect these properties. The Four Lakes, what will happen at that point is that the Four Lakes Task Force will get the plans from the Spicer engineering firm and getting the approved sites from the NRCS and the cost estimates for these projects. Once we have all that information, then we can contact the property owner and we will work with you on the next steps for getting this project carried out. So once we do, well, I guess I should back up. If you have erosion concerns and you have not contacted the Four Lakes Task Force to this point, please do so as soon as possible. And email is the preferred method of communication for reaching the Four Lakes Task Force. That email address that you can send your questions to would be KAYLAS@fourlakestaskforce.org, and that's four spelled F-O-U-R. And in your email, please let us know your name, your address, and your phone number, and then also give us a brief description of what your concerns are and why you would like someone to come take a look at it and try to help you through these erosion issues. If you don't have access to a computer, you can also call 989-941-3005. But as I stated, if you do have a computer, please send us your questions via email. So let's talk a little bit about how the cost is going to be taken care of for these projects. We're currently working on preliminary engineering cost estimates, and some of them are going through. The way that process works is we have to get those projects approved first by the NRCS, then the project gets sent to Lansing. Once it's approved in Lansing, it will then go to DC for final approval. And the cost sharing that we will use to pay for these projects will be a 75-25 split between NRCS and the homeowner. And the homeowner should be prepared to pay 25% of these erosion expenses. And the neighborhoods can work together to raise the funds to get
that entire 25%. If I had to give a ballpark idea of what these projects can cost, we're guessing right now that they would be anywhere from $2,500 to $25,000. That would be the 25% part of your share, essentially the homeowner share of the cost for the project. That's just trying to get you in the ballpark of what you could expect if that project is approved by the NRCS. The Small Business Association loans or the SBA loans are available at very low interest rates, 1.25% and 2.5% type rates. So if you are considering at all needing a loan for these, you should look at contacting SBA. And we have 3 different numbers that they can be contacted at, 571-422-8013. Second number is 571-422-6016. And the third number is 571-422-0331. And it's my understanding that there is no fee for applying for an SBA loan, and they do not ask you how much you are looking to get a loan for in your application. It's mainly to see that you would be approved. So there's really nothing stopping us for applying for an SBA loan. Just be aware that the SBA application deadline is September 4th, right around Labor Day. So if you are considering getting a loan, you'll want to apply for that as soon as possible. Last thing that I did want to mention as well is that these SBA loans are only available for primary homeowners. So if your home is a secondary home, that would not be eligible for the SBA loans. Yeah, and when you do talk with the NRCS, they can give you some idea of, the project scope, how big the project is going to be, and mainly if that project, if that erosion that you are experiencing, if that project would be covered. They won't do it in all cases because they just don't know, but if it's obvious to them, they might even be able to let you know right on the spot when they're out on your property evaluating your erosion concerns. So I think now we're at the question and answer period. And I'll introduce Dave Kepler again.
Well, good stuff, and I don't have to use slides now, so I won't get messed up. So that's probably good to do. So we've been recording your questions, and I'm sure more will come in, and I'll get through this first batch, and then we'll kind of walk through that to work through. And if we can't get to some of them, we always try to get the Q&As and stuff built on the website and stuff to work with. So let me just go through the ones I've seen just kind of in order and work through those. Lake residents have heard rumors that their assessment will be about $12,000 per year. Is this correct? And the answer to that is no, that is not correct. We don't have the assessment numbers calculated yet. It certainly is not going to be that high. I would say of all the lakes, Secord has the highest probability to be in a reasonable number that can be affordable. I know everybody will have a view about affordability, but because of the number of structure, we feel that in all scenarios we've looked at, it would be within and it has the lowest assessment of all the lakes, let me put it that way, but in terms of what we predict, but until we get some of these facts that Ron's tying in, we don't really want to share numbers that are kind of estimates, but we probably will have that understood and modeled in the next couple of next month or two, hopefully by the next board meeting. What is flow? That's the Four Lakes operations. That was put in place with the anticipation of having the third party operator come in and transitioning and working with voice. Obviously, that's not happening. It was a fully owned entity owned by the Four Lakes Task Force. It was fundamentally a corporation whose all value or profit from hydro would go into the Four Lakes Task Force to offset special assessment districts. Frankly, at this point in time, we're kind of discontinuing that company because it really, in this model, isn't going to have a business value to do it. Nobody's gained profit from it. Nobody had any ownership into it other than Four Lakes Task Force. Anything said otherwise isn't correct. Where did the $24 million cost estimate come from? And again, these are not cost estimates as much as they're concepts and opinions looking at these structures, minus 30% plus 50% ranges. Is to give us a planning view of what needs to be done and working around that. And it came from GEI, who has experience in building these dams, with a peer review by others that have looked at this and kind of adjusted the numbers around and stuff. So that's where it came from. We are now going through a period in the next 2 or 3 months to kind of refine those numbers into a feasible plan and actually get into an estimate number, and that's what we'll share with you. And those, so that's the answer there. Could Boyce sell the dams to announce? So those are a few of the questions. Could Boyce sell the dams to an outsider, or does it have to go to the counties? So there's couple points in that. One is the dams always were designed in our model as we got into it and looked through the resolutions with the counties and the contract with the counties. The property is always designed to go to the counties in game, if you will, and working through that. When we go through a condemnation process, it's not Four Lakes Task Force that is going through the condemnation process, it's the counties. We are the agent to manage that, but the counties did the resolutions. The condemnation sued the counties and working through that. And Boyce kind of pointed out in his filing with bankruptcy, when Boyce pointed out, is that he believes it's a viable concern. He believes he has community buyers, but he hasn't provided any information. And so the answer would be, at this point in time, our process is towards condemnation and the county's owning it. And we don't see if it's a feasible alternative to that in terms of a public-private buyer. We know no power companies would buy this for hydro today. We knew none before this event. And so, of course, we'll keep our eyes open and listen, but we doubt that that's there. I mean, Boyce basically is arguing that he could be at what they call debtor in possession, that let him run the dams for revenue, and he will run them and pay off the debt with that. We have not seen any finances that would substantiate that question or that point. How will the implementation costs be tracked to ensure Secord Lake is only paying for its own lake costs? We'll have separate project tracks with this, so we will know. Again, we're not going to go to the point that we're micromanaging this, to the point that we're allocating based on stuff that really that we all share benefit from. But obviously, when you do engineering around these things, just as Ron said, these things were done with a independent view on each dam. So we'll track it and engineer it with an independent view on each dam. The only exception to that, I would say, would be that Sanford and Wixom, probably because of the cost of construction and the methods of construction, probably have to be managed together in terms of construction. And there'll obviously have to be management of lake levels and structures and construction as we go forward and figure out how that works. But the basic accountability by dam project will be pretty straightforward to operate that way. Is there implications of Boyce bankruptcy on the condemnation? I would say yes. Obviously, it doesn't surprise us. He bankrupt only his operating companies, and so that would be Boyce Hydropower. He didn't put the other properties, the actual properties that own the dam, the actual companies that own the dams, into bankruptcy, but he indicated that that would be probably the long-term plan on that. So right now, we are kind of working through that process and the condemnation process at the same time. I would say it's going to take 30 to 90 days just to sort that out, but we are on a path to condemn, and we believe that the banks and stuff will intervene in that period of time on that. So we will not have a clarity of that probably for the next 3 or 4 is this the current design? Oh, well, that's a good question. If the current design lasted 100 years, why would you redesign to only last 75 plus years? Well, 75 plus is kind of 100, but I would say these dams didn't last 100 years, that they've been underinvested. They were into life probably 25 years ago, and when you look at the spillway, some of these designs, they just did not keep up with designs. So there's another question here about gold plating. This isn't about gold plating. This is about getting things from a 1924 standard to a 2024 standard. And that had just not been done over the last 25 years. Had it been done 25 years ago, we might be having a different conversation right now. How much of the $5 million grant has been spent on Secord? I don't know if we have, I don't have that off the top of my head, but I would answer it this way. First of all, it's interesting because the $5 million grant was brought forth to the Four Lakes Task Force by citizens in Midland County working with the government. I didn't see Secord or any other folks step forward and kind of look at this problem and ask for money. And so this thing has been viewed all along as a team effort to come in and share the resources. The only dam that got preference during this period of time was Wixom Lake, because we knew we had a couple issues in terms of making the transition occur. So we put about, we outlined that in the discussion. So there's about $50,000 going to Wixom, with the idea that that was the most important dam to stage first. And unfortunately, we know what happened there. The rest of the money fundamentally was pulled together in things that were common for all the dams. For instance, getting the legal lake levels in place, getting the special assessment districts defined, going through all of the proceedings with this, negotiating the contract with Boyce. All those costs that came in were fundamentally managed as a pool. So I would say of the $5 million, we have $1 million left, and we probably put $1 million on Wixom, and a little less than that, rather, $750,000 or $800,000, and the rest of it was that $3 million and the $3.5 million left was kind of common good implementation. Could the water on Secord be raised a few feet just to reduce unwanted growth and stuff? One of the things that was asked in the report that FERC asked is to give the issue will be about spillway capacity and safety, but to give a view if there's a way to mitigate this. One way of mitigation is through operations and running things at lower lake levels. So even though the lake levels at the bottom of the spillway, it's not the lowest, but there could be alternatives that they would allow seasonal or a little higher lake level, and we'll figure that out as we go forward. But again, it all comes down to why we want the property is because we don't have these answers. We haven't had these answers for 2 decades because the private owner has not shared them with us. And at this point in time, they're still under development now with FERC's oversight. Those are the questions I have. Okay. Do we need new gates? Is it a FERC requirement? So when we looked at these programs, the reason we were looking at new gates is by the time you look at the life of these gates, you're going to have to look at eventually the replacement of the gate hoists. You're going to have to look at their 100-year-old gates to tie them in. One of the issues with capacity is that maybe the gates, the sillway of the gate may need to be lowered to allow more flow to go through. So by the time you take all these gates out, you might as well put a new gate system in. It wouldn't make sense just like replacing a car, would you take it all apart and put an old part back in, and especially one that's at the end of its life to work with. Does how does HAPCAM compare to what happened in terms of water volume in May 19th flood? I think Ron covered that, and basically this wasn't a half PMF event. It was, we don't know exactly what it was, and the Secord or the Wixom Dam did not from observation, again, we got to wait for investigation, but from observation, basically failed before the Edenville site got to it. It didn't overtop, so there wasn't. This dam shouldn't have failed given the specifications that were outlined in the program and stuff to do, and that's what the investigation is about. And I know there's a lot of newspaper folks talking about that, but it's kind of hard to, give these answers on things that are fundamentally speculation without a real forensic study and stuff to do. So we have some others to do. Is it possible to do this work during the winter drawdown with the status of the eminent domain actions taken by the counties? I've answered that. So one of the things we look at is, one of the things that will be looked at on the construction, which is in there, and that's part of the value engineering, part of the design, is a balance between, like any project that you work on, the function and safety we need, the timeline we need, and the cost and affordability. And we get that right now we're not in balance on those three things, and we have to come to that. So the issue will be is we have to build this construction so we're in the middle of it and there's a major flood, we don't lose all that construction. And we also have to look at it in terms of how we stage things and what we do in the winter and what we do in the summer. And so those are possibilities we'll look at, and they're factored coming in, but we haven't looked at those in that point in time. And yeah, there will be all sorts of questions about means of construction. Could you make them all in concrete? There's a question up there on that. You could. Dams have been made that way. The filling of that fundamentally does that, filling of the spillway. The challenge is then you have a weight issue to address, and then that deals with the pillars that Ron was talking about, or the foundation you have to change to work with. And if the counties would be the owners of the dam, would they be providing the employees to manage the day-to-day operations? I hope we get to that point where we're discussing that pretty soon. Yeah, the reality is we do have these agreements with the county. We would sit through and decide. I think our belief point is that this will be an authority that either has an outsourced activity, but probably has its own operating crew to manage the dams. It's going to be unique enough and specifically enough to do that. But there will be sharing with other aspects. Obviously, a simple thing is security. I mean, if it's part of the county, we can leverage maybe law enforcement better. If there's certain things that the county does in terms of mowing the grass or doing those things, we'll truck. But right now, the view would be to have the Four Lakes Task Force have a operating entity that does that on behalf of the county and stuff to do. So what are the other ones you have?
There isn't water for 4 years without dramatically increased the environmental costs.
Yeah, so the question is, and that's one of the things we're looking at, is that if these things are treated, today there's a legal lake level, and so the interpretation of the law would be there would be a legal lake level. Our position, and I think most of the folks would agree, that over 3 to 4 years, you're going to have to manage them as a legal lake level. And that means you're going to have a different view of how you manage vegetation and erosion during that period of time. And so we have to, over the next 3 to 4 months, work with the DNR and the state and Eagles and make sure we have a plan, an environmental plan going forward that doesn't end up costing us a lot of money to kind of bring these lake levels back up. But clearly the issue has been not whether we could have the lakes, but the cost of the environmental change that would have to be overcome, that you'd have to go address to fix it, and can we be proactive in managing that to do?
How long would it take 4 years to repair when it just survived a 500-year flood?
Okay, so it didn't survive a 500-year-old flood. The statement of a 500-year-old flood was made by Midland, the city of Midland, that said with the failure of Wixom, this would have been equivalent to a 500-year flood. This was probably less than a 100-year flood, or pretty close, or between 100 and 200. It wasn't a 500-year flood. But it was stated that way to say that with the extra water and the level that it got to would have been in the predictive number that they would have set as a 500-year flood. And this dam has the same structural issues that Wixom had. That dam failed. So you can imagine what's being looked at is Does the embankment, is it going to survive another dam? You know, Wixom survived 1986 and it survived 2017. Edenville, it didn't survive this one. And so that is a fundamental question that the community needs to ask itself. And we've highlighted this before. It's not what the government says. It's, does the operator have a point of view of these dams, and is he communicating to the community, and do we understand the risks we're taking, and then are they permitted underneath FERC? And we can see by the dialogue that there's a big gap here. We need to understand that gap, and we're trying to get that understanding as fast as we can.
Some people in Secord are interested in creating a separate special assessment district. Is there a danger that if they did that, lake levels would be re-improved in Secord?
Yeah, so there's just a question on this lake level. I apologize. We had kind of up front, didn't maybe answer it clearly just because of the things going back and forth. So the good news about this, back on principles, before 2019, these lakes did not have legal lake levels. The Part 307 provided those lake levels. These lake levels, you know, the lake was established for 75 years. In the 90s, FERC took it over and established federal lake levels. And at that time, that's about the timing, not plus or minus 3 years, where the state lake levels and this Natural Resource Protection Act came in roughly within a decade of that. And so at that point in time, the state never had legal lake levels for this. So if you have, under a FERC license, no real property right as enough. You have access on your deeds to have access to the lake. There's no guarantee you can have a lake once that federal license goes away. And so I think the fact that the lake associations, including Secord, proactive in getting that is an important thing. It's to me personally not a good idea in the middle of having these lakes down to open up a court order and start talking about separating these lakes into separate court orders and not being able to implement this for any of the lakes. So our position has been, if that's what Secord wants to do as a community, and the community votes for it in, you know, some way or petitions something, but when you do that, you run the basically not getting what you want, and you're basically going to have to go through all this expenditure that we went through to go through you're going to have to go through a preliminary engineering study. You're going to have to go through your own special assessment district thing. You're going to have community hearings. You're going to have to get approval from both the from the Gladwin County, and then you and the Gladwin County are going to have to convince the Midland County and the 2 circuit court judges to change this. This seems like a very long, arduous activity that fundamentally could create a big issue. So we've tried to address the major concerns in this presentation about what I've heard is about cost and about bringing the water up. And we're told you very clearly we're going to cover the cost by implementation by dam. And we don't have all the numbers yet because we've described it. Get all the facts, we can be clear on the timing of the project. We're giving you our best estimate in terms of what the long-term repair costs are going to have. And those are going to happen. The question becomes, is there a bridging strategy for Secord? And we honestly don't know, because we can't get the numbers out of the current system with the private owner, and FERC can't get those numbers out. So that system has to yield something pretty soon here, and that's why we've taken if this is not working, we're going to take the property in control and start to manage it. And that takes a few months to do.
There's a question about why are you using Spicer Group instead of the Army Corps of Engineers? Would it not be cheaper to use the Army Corps of Engineers? Okay, why aren't we using Spicer Group? Why are we using Spicer Group versus the Army Corps of Engineers? Because that would be cheaper. And first of all, we're working, we've had almost weekly meetings with the Army Corps of Engineers on different subjects, specifically short-term and flood studies and stuff to work like that. The reality is the Army Corps, and we've talked about them about long-term construction of these dams. The Army Corps has a very specific mission around what they do on the construction of these dams, and they can provide
if it meets their mission, which is environmentally sound, that they are addressing it's economically viable, and it's basically meeting some attribute of what they're responsible to do to have these things federally owned, then they could go, and most of that is about, frankly, it's about flood management. So the lakes run completely different under an Army Corps project. So we're in conduct tying into them. But I would point out that we're right now where we're in our feasibility studies, and these are consulting work that Spicer's doing, and they're well equipped to do it. When we actually get to major engineering and designing, we will be looking at the normal process to bid this out. We would have liked to have gotten to that earlier with that. But the Army Corps of Engineers, we've talked to them, they just don't step in and take over a state project. They have to do it with a federal mandate, and we're working through that. Doesn't mean we can't work through them on finding ways to help us manage the affordability of this and working through that, and we're in dialogue with them to do that.
Why do you need to change the style of the gates?
Pardon?
Why do you need to change the style of the gates?
Oh, so I think the reality is, the question is, why do we need to change the style of the gates? I'm answering these questions because I think we've answered them already. But when we take the gates out, there's two issues with the gates that go up. One is getting the higher capacity, and one is, frankly, that's what was done in 1924. But these other gates that go down, you see you have less issues with how they fail safe. You don't have the debris racking up in them. And there's a better capacity management to do them. So those are, by the way, again, conceptual designs after, we did in a short period of time. These will all go to a feasibility study where we'll have a lot of review and engineering peer review on that to do. Okay. Is Boyce generating power from those dams? No, he's not to work on that. There's water that will go over. They've asked to lower the spillway down, and once in a while you'll see the spillways move up and down because they're doing some of the inspections that were asked to be done, but there's no power being generated. I don't even know if they technically can right now.
But if you set up outsiders visiting the lakes, so the cost burden for the repair doesn't fall.
So the the question becomes is we have a special assessment district. The way that works is the question is, can outsiders pay for some of these costs and dams that visit the lakes and stuff to do it? That's not how the special assessment district is set up. We can certainly, and I've said before in the meetings, before we got into this thing, we can look at other fees and structures to come in. But right now we're trying to get the lakes up with the fundamental structure. So, boat stamps and locking won't tie into that. We could look at general funding from the counties, but we believe, like in Gladwin County, they're already struggling with their current budgets, and you don't want to do tax increases. So then the question becomes is, can you get other people to come on the lake that enjoy it to pay? We've looked at that. We've tried to build a little bit of it into this assessment model. But it's something to consider. It doesn't fit well into the current financing structure that we're building, but we're open to looking at it. Like we said, it will be something that helps us a little bit, but not a lot.
There's a lot of questions regarding what can people do about the weeds that are growing on Secord Lake.
Weed trees.
Weed trees, yeah.
The question is about what we can do. There's several questions about weeds and the trees and stuff growing. We have to it's kind of like like, okay, we got an issue now. We're working with the DNR and the DEQ, and we're looking at what options we have. And then what's the affordability to do them. In the meantime, I think we're saying we don't. I mean, it's. We don't have a recommendation on what to do with the weed guys.
No, this is Don Zackett. So I'm focusing on that issue principally on Wixom Lake, but some of it applies to all the lakes. And if you do have weed treatment, aquatic weed treatment underway, you might want to discuss this issue with whomever organized that weed treatment. If there's a special assessment that's being paid on Secord, it's either done through a lake improvement board or through a township assessment. Once we have some guidance from the regulating agencies, the DEQ, Eagles, and through the lake improvement boards on what can be done, it will probably be general to all the lakes. So we're attempting to get that answers from them. We are in contact with them several times a week, and they are trying to come up with their recommendation.
So I think I think this is a new issue, and honestly, we are working through it as fast as we can, and so is the DEQ and DNR. I would say stay close to your lake improvement boards and the weed control. The township would know who those folks are on your weed thing. We've kind of coached folks that, hey, what if you start to modify the lake bottoms and deal with that issue, it starts to get into issues with the DEQ, and so as a homeowner, we'll try to get some answers as soon as we can at this thing to do. It'll become a very significant problem next year, and that's where we got to get time. So I think it's happening now, but it's manageable and stuff to do. There was a question here on forensic. Did FERC say that there wasn't? Did FERC not clearly state that a forensic study was not required? No, they stated the opposite. They said that a forensic is required on Secord. That what they asked is all three of these lakes be brought down, and if you look at that, and then the state came in and involved with it as well to add Wixom Lake into it. And the issue that's been discussed is when you look at a system failure, you have to look at all four lakes, and so they want to look at all four of these dams. And also what's happening here, so people understand, it's not that there's just a Wixom Lake problem, it's that the operator of a dam failed. And they're going to look at all his dams in that system to see what's going on. And that's why this is happening, and that's why it's driven down. You don't get to have, as an operator, have one dam fail in a system and then just say everything else is okay. You're going to have to sit down and look at all these things and see if the issues that you were doing on maintenance, on engineering, on operations were consistent across all those, and that your operations caused an issue. Is there some issues that are that occurred on Wixom that might occur on Secord? So no, the FERC is looking at a forensic investigation. The second piece of it, though, they're also have asked for inspections on each of these dams right after they failed to say, is there things that you have to do for stability? And clearly on Sanford and Edenville, there's a lot of stuff to do for stability. We haven't got those reports and what the issues are around Smallwood and Secord. And I think the idea that nothing happened to those dams is not correct. The tail race eroded, the dams flooded, houses that shouldn't have flooded, and those are things that they're looking at as well. So I think it's a misconception that the dams were just performed exactly the way they were supposed to. They didn't, and the system didn't perform the way they are. And one of the challenges is, and I'm not trying to offend FERC, I'm just trying to explain it, this is their thought process, is that, hey, how did they work through that together? What we don't have a connection on yet, and they don't either, is once this other inspection gets done, if those dams look really good, will we be allowed to bring them up while we do the forensics? I think until they have we don't know, but I would say until the big issues are going to be as we've described. Does this embankment look like it can manage itself, the spillway capacity, and are there other operation issues that will have to bring back up? So as we described in these slides earlier that probably we went over quickly, is for this to come back up, the critical issues are going to have to be addressed once those get defined. There's going to have to be a financial plan to fix the remedial efforts, and there'll have to be a strategic financing and engineering plan to deal with the strategic issues that come up. And if those strategics are big enough to create concern, they'll become critical issues that have to get fixed. So until we get that, which I think is still probably, he's due with the reports in mid-August, it'll take, assuming he delivers those, he being the voice companies to FERC, and FERC reviews them, then we'll get an answer from FERC. That'll be September sometime. Then he'll have to come back and address, assuming there's not another recycle of these things, he'll going to have to address what the plan is for going forward. And frankly, our belief system here is enough's enough. We just need to move forward and get these dams and find out for ourselves and work from that.
There's a couple questions regarding when and if those task force gets grant money donations, how will it be spent, how will it be divided between them?
Okay, so the question becomes, as we get donations and grant money, how does it get spread if it's on the behalf of all 4 lakes? And well, let's use that on what we've already said is like if the lake association, we have 2 kinds of pools here. If somebody wants to donate directly to us to help us with the effort here, we're trying to keep assessment rolls off of everybody's back for a couple years. So we're looking for donations to do this, both public and private donations and individual donations. We've said if the lake associations through their funds collect funds, they can donate them and specify them to their own lake. We're trying to manage this across everybody to work through. So if people want to specify their stuff just to go to their lake, they can do that through the special, by giving it to their lake associations to do. But then if we get a grant, so here's a question. If right now we've raised, I think most of the money that's been raised here has been in Midland County, and we're planning to spread that across all the lakes because we've got a general fund we're raising to. If we get a foundation to donate us, we plan to spread that across every lake, in terms of what needs to get done and make the right decisions on it. So I would just say we can't cherry pick this stuff, folks, and so I think we're doing our best effort to work through this. We're spending a lot of time trying to get this erosion paid for all the lakes. Well, reality, Wixom will get more of that money because it'll have more erosion, and we're not going to spread that evenly. We're going to address it by project. So I think we have a good teamwork here among all the negotiations to work together and balance these things between what benefits all of us and what benefits a few of us and stuff to do with it. Again, I would say that Secord has the lowest cost, not that everybody doesn't have a cost problem, everybody doesn't have an affordability problem, but I think the reality is we have the most confidence that we can finance this through for Secord more than any other lake.
Are there intermediate repairs that could be done to allow for recreational use of Secord?
Yeah, are there intermediate repairs we don't know. I mean, I would tell you right now, we know there's 21 repairs. One of them looks critical. The rest of them that they could be addressed are manageable, but it's probably in 6-figure, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we don't have the 2 questions about the embankments and the spillway and the fundamentally confidence FERC has in the operator to operate. So we believe that the answer to that, as I said earlier, could be that we can do all these major repairs and find an interim strategy to bring up if we can mitigate things. But we're not going to commit to anything because we don't have the numbers, and we need to get those things look forward and kind of manage. But I think it's a reasonable question to ask. Obviously, we want the lakes up. Everybody wants all the lakes up as fast as we can get them. We're not going to slow one up in the short term here to kind of, if we can bring it up. And the reality is right now we just have to work through the next 2 months of facts here to figure out and come back with a clear plan. So, I mean, I can't apologize for something that the operator does not have the information to provide, and that FERC now has to extract it from them and figure it out. We're good? Okay, so I think we've got most of them answered. Appreciate the time. I just want to reiterate, it really, I feel like in general the lake community is working very well in supporting what's going on here. It's a tremendous effort given the structure that's changed. I understand from a Secord point of view that this is the lakes went down and it really looks like, hey, why is this our problem now? That was honestly, we've gone through every lake that's had this problem. When Sanford went down, it was a Sanford problem, and then that was kind of realized. And so we're kind of coming to this awareness kind of collectively together that all 4 of these systems really need to work together to address them. And there are different economic problems on each of these lakes and how to address it. But we have the system in place, and we have the commitment from our elected representatives, from the counties, from the state representatives, from our everybody working on this to help us. And so to me, we should be helping them help us pull us through it. And so now's the time for us to work together. So I appreciate the questions. If there's specific things we didn't answer, we'd be happy to come back and fill them out. We're trying to do these more frequently and be more lake specific, and trying to provide that out. And we're trying to provide you information when we know it, but we're also not trying to create an environment where we're telling something that we have to reverse our points later on to do. Phil, did you want to finish up with anything, or are you? Okay. So thank you for your time, and we'll continue to communicate. Our next board meeting's coming up in September 10th, I think, and our commitment is to have more clarity on these points as much as we can and go forward on. So thank you very much.
Thanks for watching, and make sure you hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. Also make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next videos I will be posting, and leave your questions, comments, and suggestions below. As always, I just want to give a massive thanks to the people who support me on Patreon. Never underestimate the value of your contribution to keeping this channel going. Thank you.